This morning, I want to go to FEMA headquarters there in Washington, D.C., where you see Vice President Mike Pence. He and President Trump have been on top of this all day long. They received a briefing earlier this morning. And, of course, the president has been in touch with Florida Governor Rick Scott as well. I believe we had David Curley at FEMA headquarters, but he's not wired up right this second. We'll try to get to him when we can. But FEMA spread out across the region right now. Of course, facing some tough times. They've been working 12-hour shifts for the last several days coming off of Hurricane Harvey in Houston as well. You also see the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, right there as well. Other cabinet officials. President Trump was meeting with his entire cabinet in Camp David this weekend as he stays on top of this storm and offers FEMA and state and local officials all the help they need so far. Congress passed over $15 billion in funding for FEMA at the end of this week after the president struck a deal with Democrats there. But the resources spread so thin right now. But the administration so intent now in showing that they are on top of this. They are taking it seriously. They are not being blindsided by this storm. And Amy, it's the recovery from a storm like this, days and weeks.
Maybe months. And also even years, because some of these places, especially on the west coast of Florida, are the most vulnerable places, and we're putting one of the worst case scenarios on top of them. So taking into consideration tonight, Tampa, this is one place that is so vulnerable that they have done FEMA studies. Even within the last year, there have been serious articles written up by both government and scientists about the vulnerability of a city that has built its homes literally feet from the water. It's 4 million residents living very close to the water. Having to rebuild a city like that could take a long time. And even if the effects are not a complete Category 4 impact, it still is a lot of infrastructure to make right again.
Right. They are so vulnerable up in that part. Right now, though, we are seeing the eye wall of the hurricane scheduled to approach Marco Island, Florida.
Here's some interesting numbers for you. Of course, we're looking at the 1 p.m. update that gave us those numbers with a Category 4 storm still in place. But also, just in the last couple of minutes, we've gotten a millibar reading, which takes a drop of about 4 millibars. What that means for us as meteorologists is sometimes we can see winds decreasing when that happens. That could be a bit of good news coming out of the stats. But no question about it, all of the lightning within those orange and yellow and red bands produces the storm, but it also indicates that's where the wind is getting ready to rush into Marco Island and Naples. Now, wind at its very height in a hurricane is followed directly by the surge. And so sometimes you'll see the waters pull back, but then they come in with a full force and they come inland at heights that we've been predicting from anywhere from 12 to 15 feet.
And that is likely to play out all across the west coast of Florida right now. Amy, thanks very much. I'm going to go back to Washington right now. Mary Bruce at the White House. Mary, we just did see Mike Pence, several cabinet officials there at FEMA headquarters. The president has been at Camp David at times with his cabinet, but on top of this storm every hour through this weekend.
Yeah, the president has been closely monitoring this throughout the day from Camp David. He did participate in a briefing earlier this morning with the vice president and several other members of his cabinet. We've also seen the president really using the megaphone of the presidency here to urge everyone in the storm's path to heed the warnings of state and local officials. And we've been hearing over and over again from the FEMA administrator, from the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, that they insist that they are as prepared as is possible for this kind of an event. But, George, this really is an unprecedented test for the president, for government agencies, to have them dealing with what is really two historic hurricanes within just 2 weeks of each other.
Just 2 weeks of each other. And it did scramble the agenda of the president for the month of September and beyond as well. Surprised a lot of people earlier this week when he struck that deal with Democrats to approve this FEMA funding.
Yeah, the president reaching across the aisle, working with Democratic leaders on a short-term funding bill that would raise the debt limit, increase government funding through December, but that also provided that critical $15 billion in hurricane relief funding that will be so needed right now. But of course, George, that is really just a down payment. The ultimate tab here is likely to be tens of billions of dollars more. That is going to be a big focus, a big point of attention here up on Capitol Hill, especially as lawmakers come back to Washington early early next week. For right now, the president has seemed to be focused very squarely on the needs of those in the path of the storm, making sure that everyone gets to safety. As the president said yesterday, property is replaceable, but lives are not. Safety comes first.
Certainly not. Mary Bruce, thanks very much. I want to go back to Fort Myers right now, where Tom Yamas has been outside most of the morning, and now, Tom, boy, we really see the winds as high as they've been all day.
That's right, George, and we finally are approaching hurricane force winds. I want to show you, have the wind gauge right here. We've been pointing it right into those east winds that are coming from east to west, and we hit just about maybe 5 minutes ago, George. I don't know if you can see that there, but we hit 74 miles per hour. That's the strongest wind gust we've seen so far. With those strong wind gusts, we're starting to see some superficial sort of cosmetic damage. You can see up there, part of an air conditioner in this building right here by the marina is starting to come apart. Now, once that goes airborne, that becomes a projectile. That's why you want to keep a lot of people off the road. We're staying close by to this building right over here, so we're okay as far as coming in and out. But right now, the winds are picking up, George. I'm going to send it back to you.
Yeah, because we want to check back in Washington. There's Vice President Mike Pence speaking at FEMA headquarters.
Support the efforts of Governor Scott and state and local officials across Florida, and we will continue to do that. It's important to remember this is and continues to be a very dangerous storm. And we urge everyone within the sound of our voice to heed the warnings of local officials, whether that be to shelter in place, or if in the farthest northern parts of the state there's still an opportunity, according to local officials, to move out of the way and to evacuate to a safe shelter. The people need to take this storm with great seriousness. It is a storm of historic and epic proportions, and the efforts of every level of our federal government are here to stand alongside the state and local officials in the life-saving mission, and very soon in the recovery mission, and very soon in the rebuilding mission. But President Trump, who spoke to Governor Scott this morning, he spoke to governors in neighboring states and said two very simple messages. Number one, we are with you. The prayers of the American people are with the people of Florida. And secondly, as the President said, our mission here at the federal level in support of local efforts is very simple. Wherever Hurricane Irma goes, we'll be there first. We'll be there with resources and support, both to save lives and to help to recover and rebuild these states and these communities.
The track has changed.
That's our pledge.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
This is a very dangerous storm. This is a life-threatening storm, and it's enormously important that every American in the path of this storm take the warnings of state and local officials to heart. We can rebuild cities. We can rebuild buildings. We cannot rebuild lives. And saving lives is the priority of all of us, from the President to Governor Scott on down. And we'll stay focused on the life-saving mission. But it all begins with Americans in harm's way, listening to state and local officials, whether that be to shelter in place, or if local officials say there is still time to evacuate to a safe shelter, to do that. But to heed those warnings, to act on those warnings, put your safety, your family's safety, and the safety of those vulnerable citizens that you know around you first. And we'll get through this.
Vice President Pence,
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
What aspect of this storm really concerns you the most?
Well, clearly the briefing that we received at Camp David this morning caused the President to have great concern for the impact of the storm moving up the West Coast, and the potential through heavy winds and storm surge to compromise cities and compromise lives. And that's why we need to take this seriously. We've all seen the experts speak about that topmost part of the storm that will be striking, it appears, potentially the west coast of Florida as Hurricane Irma moves north. And people that are in harm's way in just a few hours in Marco Island, in Naples, in Sanibel, in Captiva, and then north to Tampa, need to take these warnings seriously. And we know that every American is, and know that every resource of the federal government is being brought to bear to support state and local efforts. And from all that I've heard and all the President's heard, I think the American people can be proud of the efforts that are underway. But we need to remain vigilant. People need to take the warnings seriously. And the people of Florida need to know that our hearts and our prayers and all of our efforts are with them and will be with them until this storm passes.
Mr. Vice President, thanks everybody. Thanks.
Unified message there from state, local officials, the federal government, Vice President Pence right there, President Trump. This is a dangerous storm. This is a big storm. Listen to officials who say, get inside, hunker down, don't take unnecessary risks. I want to bring Mary Bruce back in from Washington. And Mary, the president and his team seized by this storm, sending out all the resources to local officials that they can. As we said, $15 billion approved by Congress for FEMA at the end of this week. Earlier this year, the president's budget had actually cut disaster assistance.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of question about what those cuts could mean, given the kind of recovery effort that you're going to most likely see here. The president, of course, did sign that $15 billion in extra hurricane relief on Friday. He has since been in constant communication, we're told, with the governors, the governor of Florida and the other affected states and territories, signing emergency declarations, which frees up even additional government funding where needed. Look, this is going to be a very long road, and this administration is well aware of that. Congress is well aware of that. This is going to take tens of billions of dollars when you get into a conversation about recovery. But right now, as you hear from the vice president, the president, from everything that we're hearing out of this White House, they are focused right now not so much on what comes next, but what is happening right now. And that is, as you heard the vice president say, saving lives. This is a life-saving mission, he said. They want to make sure that everyone is heeding the advice of state and local officials, finding safety where they can. We've seen the president so far today actually retweeting some messages from government agencies, from state and local officials with advice, with phone numbers you can call, resources for them to make sure that everyone has a safe place to ride out this storm and is following the advice of the experts.
And as this storm is continuing across the state of Florida, there's no way the president can visit now. He did visit the state of Texas twice during Hurricane Harvey. Mary, are they talking at all at the White House about when the president might be able to visit Florida?
We're told it is possible that he would like to visit at some point in the coming days. But as you know, George, it's always so difficult to time these kinds of visits. The president and the White House, of course, acutely aware that they don't want to be a drag on resources, that they want to make sure that resources are being directed where they're most needed, that they aren't hindering that in any way with a visit from the president and all of the security that entails, but that they are interested in getting the president there to see the aftermath, to speak with those affected as soon as is feasibly possible.
Okay, Mary Bruce at the White House, thanks very much. I want to stay